Greetings, everybody. This talk was written for the oil and gas industry personnel as a target audience, but I've massaged it a bit and changed a few things, and it's general enough for any public audience now as well. So for the next hour or so, we're going to take a look into the future of energy. What might a low greenhouse gas emission energy future look like? How the heck can we eliminate hydrocarbon emissions and still provide all the services we currently enjoy? How might society change in response to that? Right up front, I want to say some of this material might be hard to hear. After all, a lot of our livelihoods depend on how this energy transition shakes out. And I would say listen in the moment, take it in as a possibility without going through all the rebuttals in your mind, because that's when you stop listening. So there's power in entertaining a thought without accepting it. Any desirable future always starts with a clear vision of how we want it to look. Seneca said, he was a Stoic philosopher from ancient Rome, and he said, if one does not know which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. So you got to know where you're going. We're going to paddle across this lake together, and I get to be in the stern seat, steering the ship. So, as always, I begin my talks with a brief land acknowledgement. So, Oki, Abawashtash, Dadanastana, Tansi, Bonjour, hello. My name is Maggie Hanna, and my family is of Irish and Scottish ancestry. And we have been here since 1884, 140 years, 7 generations in North America, and now consider ourselves Canadian. I'm also adopted into the Roan family by my beloved sister, Moss Roan, of the Ermineskin Cree Nation and Mountain Creek Camp, for about 3 decades now. So I am so grateful to be here on and with these lands and waters stewarded by First Peoples for tens of thousands of years. May we create space within our hearts and minds to listen, consider, and humbly contribute to positive futures where all of us together and all our relations walk together in a good way. I feel so blessed. This is me and my sister Moss, and we have even started to look like each other. And my Cree name has to do with buffalo. We have lots to cover today. Some key topics include, key principles to be aware of when predicting the future, how demand destruction for fossil liquid hydrocarbon fuels will likely happen, in my view, new game-changing technology that will both provide worldwide increasing markets for natural gas while decarbonizing their use on site by over 90%. And how combining this technology with biogas content can actually decarbonize the atmosphere at scale. And we have some ideas on how new tech will likely shape the form of our decarbonized energy future. So let's get into it. No question, hydrocarbons are awesome. For the past 175 years, since the first steam engine was powered by coal in 1712, burning coal, oil, and natural gas have provided us with the energy that is affordable, reliable, energy dense, easy to transport, and storable for seasons to years. We have built our civilizations around them in the last couple of centuries. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them on this slide that you see, all depend on number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. We have designed and built ingenious hydrocarbon infrastructure systems to provide home heating, water purification and distribution, sewage systems, fueling stations for transportation, and fuel for agricultural machineries so we can feed ourselves, and the power to run industry, to name a few of their many uses. And our human lifespans, health and quality of life have increased because of hydrocarbons. But there are unintended consequences, and We have been pooping the results of that combustion, the CO2 and water vapor and some methane, off into the atmosphere ever since. So now we are being required to do things differently, to redesign our energy systems so that we can get the services currently provided to us by hydrocarbons, but without the emissions. Energy transition is going to be messy. Why? Because there's a whole host of interrelated issues that need solving together. Some of them are listed here. So global warming of air and oceans, weather weirding and the jet stream being deviated, biodiversity loss and habitat loss, likely the start of the next mass extinction, plastics and microplastics in our air, water, soil, and bodies, ocean acidification, toxic chemistry in the air, water, soil, and our bodies, waste mismanagement like sewage into our water bodies, municipal solid waste in landfills, methane production, air pollution. And then there's reconciliation with First Peoples, which is critical. We have a lot to learn from them. Energy insecurity, food insecurity, prosperity insecurity, and as usual, everything is connected to everything else. So what can we say about energy transition? Well, here are some principles that I use. There's no such thing as more sustainable. Either we're sustainable or we are not. And there's no such thing as clean energy. Only energy sources that with lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions than others. We must maintain energy on demand and not allow the system to devolve into energy only as available. Electrify everything we can. 80% of Alberta's power is consumed by industry. The rest is us consumers. We estimate Alberta's grid will need to expand 2 to 3 times to serve electrified industry, plus electric cars and electric heat pumps for home heating and cooling. Virtual power plants will help us with that, and we will talk about them soon. We have to reduce and then stop burning liquid fossil fuels for transportation. We've got to capture CO2 on an industrial scale and do something useful with it. We'll look at new tech to do exactly that. We have to convert the main grid into multiple yet connected mini-grid systems. Actively engage in cross-silo innovation thinking so that the benefits that accrue across many endeavors by making new technologies become more economic. We have to increase energy storage of all kinds, stop energy waste, which is currently 30%, even in each of our homes, and change our patterns and personal behavior. Another key principle is to design for robustness and not just resilience. This is key in the increasingly weird weather world that we're going into. Here's the analogy. Reptiles are resilient and mammals are robust. Reptiles are cold-blooded and calorie efficient. They need about 1/10 of the calories compared to a mammal. They can run fast for very short distances. They die in cold weather. Mammals, however, are robust. They're warm-blooded. They need 10 times the calories compared to reptiles. They're not efficient, but they can run fast for a really long time, thrive in cold weather. So resilience means that when there is a shock that happens, we suffer, but then we recover quickly. Robustness means that when there is a shock, we don't suffer, and the system in place easily handles that shock. So my 5 principles for robustness in the electrical grid system are backup, 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 flexibility, and sharing. In a world where, with more extreme weather weirding, we need to build robustness into our systems at many levels of scale. We need backup in the family dwelling, in the neighborhood, to the city, to the region, at all levels. So we're going to be looking at possible future energy scenarios together today. And I'm going to lay them out for you as I see it. So let's start with some principles about predicting the future. Number one is the future is always in flux. Its composition largely depends on the choices that we make both individually and collectively between now and then. For example, the view of the future I will present today assumes humanity does not embroil itself and waste resources on World War III. If that happens, then all bets are off. I agree with the celebrated novelist John Steinbeck, who said, all war is a symptom of man's failure as a thinking animal. So let's not go there. Probabilities of a thing happening in the future are based on the trajectories that are laid down in the past. Predicting the technology future is about being aware of the trajectories of technology development. I've spent 2 hours every day since 2009 making myself aware of the events related to new energy technology developments and watched how they inform current and future challenges and how they enable each other. So arriving at probabilities of a certain thing happening by a certain time is not a number crunching science, but more of a felt sense based on an integrated awareness of what has happened in that arena in the recent past, so that you are getting from me, so what you're getting from me today is mostly my informed opinion. There is a difference between the goal we aspire to by 2050 or whatever it is. In our case, desired goal is the decarbonized energy future. There's a difference between that and the pathways we need to get there. They're not the same. Why? We cannot take a step from where we're not. We can't just magically jump ahead to what we're trying to achieve in the future. Many environmental activists, for example, don't understand that yet. I watch them focus on the goal and trying to implement that directly without understanding the pathways we need to take to get there. We have to use our existing resources to take us farther along the pathway towards the goal, where different resources will be required and available. In short, the future decarbonized energy system will be accomplished on the backs of hydrocarbons because right now there is nothing else. But we can use them more wisely and with less emissions. Hydrocarbons currently provide about 80% of all global energy. That's nothing to sneeze at. Fossil hydrocarbons are a limited resource. So one of the reasons I'm so glad we're addressing climate change by replacing the burning of fossil fuels is so that there are oil, gas, and coal reserves left over for future generations to use for things like plastics and humics and lubricants and petrochemicals, all of those things. I would not be surprised if our future generations look back at us and laugh, saying, I can't believe they used to burn this valuable stuff. So, back to principles of predicting the future. Every region of the world has to focus on developing their existing local energy resources in alignment with their available capital and creativity. And this means the energy system in every region of the world will look somewhat different. We have all the technical resources needed to get a really good start on this now. And those can be shared as economics dictate. And of course, more ways are under development as we speak. All future decarbonized energy systems will be accomplished on the backs of hydrocarbons because there is nothing else, as we just said. For example, it is hydrocarbons that currently heat pure quartz sand to make polycrystalline silicon for solar panels. But we can use hydrocarbons more wisely and with substantially less emissions. We will get to that. Everything affects everything. Future energy systems thinking always requires cross-silo innovation and economic thinking. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you have two great new technologies, right? Which might each currently be close to economic In the future, they might be very economic as the technology ecosystem requirements evolve, but it's hard to move forward when one is too far ahead of one's time. In order to make a new technology economic, sometimes we can pair it with a complementary technology so that together they can perform like larger, more valuable services, which is worth more money today. And that makes both technologies economic and able to move forward. Now I want to expand on the distinction between the goal by 2050 and the pathways we need to take to get there as they relate to hydrocarbon use. We cannot take a step from where we're not. So we will be doing things today that we will not be doing by 2050 in order to get there without people freezing and starving in the dark. The rainbow-colored line on this slide is the pathway to the goal. There's no question that we will continue to need to burn fossil fuels in the close to near future because, as we said, the energy transition can only be accomplished on the backs of hydrocarbons. We will talk about how to decarbonize our hydrocarbon use in a little further on. But as consumers, we can't make decarbonized consumer energy choices until we have built out alternative options that are dependable and affordable for us to choose. That said, here is a cartoon on what I think will happen to hydrocarbon demand between now and the goal by 2050-ish with rough timing. Coal is in black, oil in green, and natural gas in red. So we're looking at demand destruction of coal and then oil. I'm really happy about coal going away because a coal mine is a significant methane emitter forever after, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. Also, when we burn coal, nasties like PM2.5 and arsenic and mercury are put into the atmosphere for all of us to breathe. That is one reason in the past I would not move to Edmonton, which was downwind of the Genesee coal plants. The last one of them has just shut down in the past week and has been converted to natural gas. Yay! Thermal coal demand in the world peaked in 2013. Metallurgical coal use has plateaued, and my guess is it will be replaced by hydrogen. Oil demand is poised to drop, as we will discuss in a moment. Natural gas is in red. And I think demand will grow in the short to medium term before declining somewhat as the other cleaner technologies are brought into the market. Then demand stabilizes farther into the future as a backup for renewables. Biogas from agriculture waste will continue to grow and displace some of the fossil gas, maybe 15 to 20% in the future. The green line represents oil demand destruction, and we will talk about that next. We will take some time on this slide. There's a lot that impacts from it. So, crude oil is the feedstock for 4 kinds of transportation fuel: gasoline, diesel, jet for airplanes, and bunker for shipping. And we're going to focus on land transportation now, and that's gasoline and diesel. Let's look at the demand destruction pathways for gasoline and diesel used for land transportation. And remember that 78% of every single barrel of oil produced in Alberta is used to make transportation fuel. This is my hand-drawn and painted version or vision of how the transportation is likely to go. Yellow dashed line means we are here. First, let's look at the horizontal time axis together. You will see there's no absolute dates put in this chart, and that's because, again, the future depends on the choices we make individually and collectively between now and then. So predicting dates is just too fluid. However, we can see how different technologies stack up in time with respect to each other. I divide the future into 13 descriptive terms, starting with where we are now, and that's with our legacy technology. And then there's here and now for those technologies that exist here and now, but are still pre-commercial, and then almost commercial, close future, near future, short term, short medium term, medium long term, far future, distant future, and over the horizon. Now, look at the vertical axis. The first category, in brown, shows us the demand destruction of gasoline and diesel fuels. Some leading indicators include inner city areas that have banned fossil fuel-powered vehicles, like Stockholm, starting the end of this year, 2024. The European Union and several states in the US have already passed bans on gas-powered vehicles starting in 2035. But vehicle bans are not that material yet. Just one example of the many leading future indicators. That's really all it is. We are likely close to our peak diesel and gasoline demand now. In my view, that it will be declining from here despite adding more people and higher living standards to the planet. If we get this right, these will be handled by new technologies, especially in poorer countries, which can easily leapfrog over legacy tech into new technologies. And that's easier to do when a country doesn't really have a reliable working system yet. An example is how African countries leapfrogged over building a telephone wire communication system straight to cell phone towers. So that is the liquid fossil fuel curve. I anticipate we will be at perhaps half to 2/3 of world production of oil by about short to medium term. All the rest of the colored categories detail how we're going to get there by progressively replacing gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles with others. Notice the next middle four technologies, and these are bridge technologies to the future with some popular examples. They include, in dark blue, we have hybrid gasoline electrics, which started with a Toyota Prius. In light blue, plug-in hybrid gasoline electrics, like the Hyundai Tucson. In rose, we have retrofitting legacy diesel freight trucks and buses, plus construction and agricultural equipment with hydrogen biofuel bolt-on kit to get up to 90% hydrogen and 10% diesel. Company called DTI out of Edmonton already has this technical problem licked and is close to commercial. In red are the hydrogen internal combustion engines. And that might make some sense for bridging the gap to hydrogen fuel cell for medium-duty vehicles. JCB has built one. The final three categories are technologies where my envisioned future will likely settle. They are, in orange, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles that started with the Toyota Mirai. In light green, battery electric vehicles made popular by Tesla. These two technologies are already legacy technologies today, as the slide shows, and they're building momentum and improving over time, and that will continue to dominate the future. And then in dark green is mobility as a service, or MaaS, M-A-A-S. Earth simply does not have enough battery metals to provide battery electric vehicles to everyone. Even given the expanded battery chemistries that are here and now and diversifying fast. Right now, we're looking at the original lithium-ion chemistry, but also lithium iron phosphate, which contains no cobalt, that's a good thing, lithium-sulfur batteries, sodium-ion, solid-state batteries with graphene anodes, et cetera, So also, we currently have 3 times the battery recycling capacity compared to the end-of-life batteries to feed them. My 2013 Tesla S85 battery came with 475 kilometers of range, and it has lost 2.2 kilometers of range per year, and is currently running at about 453 kilometers of range. That battery is likely to outlast the car body. So, Today, the average total cost of owning a car in Canada is just over $10,000 a year, according to Canadian Auto Association's Driving Costs 2023 report. And this factors in fuel, insurance, maintenance, repairs, financing, depreciation, registration fees, and taxes. At some point, around the medium term, even with a fully functioning battery circular economy, we will be forced, in my view, to change away from vehicle ownership to mobility as a service. Imagine you could call up an autonomous, shared electric car on your phone that would arrive in 3 minutes and take you door to door, solving the first mile, last mile problem in any urban area. Now, we are already using at least 16 plus door-to-door driving companies like Uber and Lyft and such. When they become autonomous, the cost would be 1/10 the cost of car ownership and be safer. And the road surfaces will likely decline by about 60%. And we can reclaim that land for other purposes. So now let's talk about natural gas. My prediction is that natural gas is set to expand. Why? Because a new technology developed in Calgary, Alberta, called rain cage carbon is a world changer. What if every legacy industrial scale plant in the world could age out as a low carbon emitting plant? What if every legacy natural gas burning plant emitted only 1/10 of the CO2 it currently produces today? And what if CO2 byproduct of methane combustion becomes a valuable commodity by being converted into engineered carbon? That's graphene and family molecules. This is what I see coming. How, I hear you ask? Well, Rain Cage is a startup company in Calgary capable of doing exactly that. Rain Cage Eden technology is a bolt-on to an industrial scale stack. It grabs over 90% of the CO2 from any flue gas stream between like 2 and 70%, which is pretty much all of them. And it converts that CO2 into useful engineered carbon molecules. And by that I mean graphene, carbon nanotubes, and buckyballs, etc., and all their cousins, at tons per day per site. And it releases the combustion oxygen back into the atmosphere where it came from. This tech can be used for greening existing power production, blue hydrogen production, and many other applications. Imagine putting an Eden unit on a cement plant, grabbing over 90% of the CO2 and actually the SOx and NOx as well out of that flue gas, making graphene on site, and adding that graphene to the cement to total 1% of the mix, and that would make that resulting cement 30% stronger than it was before. So you need 30% less cement to do the same job. These carbons have a myriad of other industrial uses, from medical applications to paints and adhesives, to making car bodies, batteries, to strengthening cement and other building materials, to name a few. And we think that about 60% of the products we use every day can be made better with the addition of affordable graphene family molecules. This technology also means that natural gas will likely be the future hydrogen carrier of choice in the future. And I know that's a bold statement, and here's why I think that. Imagine this. What if Canada were to ship LNG to, say, Japan, and then Japan puts it into a steam methane reformer, which is a machine that makes hydrogen and CO2 out of it. And then we grab over 90% of that CO2 out of the flue gas stream and make valuable, solid, structured carbons out of it for sale into Japan's manufacturing sector. I know this is a wordy slide, but I want you to be able to take a picture of this information if you wish. As an industry in transition, oil and gas really doesn't have a good pivot unless they decide to become true energy companies, especially getting into low carbon hydrogen and low emissions electricity production, transmission, distribution, and storage. There are many possibilities I see that can use existing oil and gas skill sets, but they are smaller markets and they create smaller value. Here's a partial list of the future work where geophysical, geological, and engineering skills will be needed. Natural gas, biogas, liquid natural gas ports, methane pipelines will likely expand significantly. So get into biogas production. Asphalt will continue as it is. Bitumen to carbon building materials will grow. Petrochem and lubricants will continue as it is for now. Blue hydrogen will continue to improve and expand. It's a good pivot. Natural gas peakers will continue and expand for the last resource power supply and grid balancing. Geothermal will expand and involves horizontal drilling. Gravity wells become a use for about 30% of old oil and gas wells, providing electricity storage and arbitrage in Alberta using Kemp Gregory's Renew Well energy technology. Salt cavern construction increases for hydrogen storage. Hydrogen storage in drained natural gas pools is a possibility to pursue. Natural hydrogen and helium exploration, although, I'm really not yet convinced by the economics of natural geologic hydrogen. I guess that's a wait and see. Lithium-rich brines involve drilling, production, and reinjection. Exxon is going to start lithium production from brines for EVs by 2027. Biofuel refining will expand and is a good pivot. Stopping natural gas leaks along the entire supply chain is a must and will hugely expand, I hope. Reclamation of tailings ponds, industrial refining and processing sites, and well sites hopefully will increase while companies still have the money to do it. I recommend using oil-eating bacteria. Critical metals mining will expand from sources like hard rock, seawater, formation brines. That's an area to get into. And carbon capture and sequestration, CCS, and deep saline aquifers will stall out, in my view. I think it's a lost leader. As we will see later, geologic sequestration of CO2 is about 10 times more expensive than the new CO2 utilization technologies. You will notice that I put CCS last on this list. I'm not a fan. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. For every molecule of CO2 we put away into the ground forever, we are removing 2 atoms of oxygen out of the atmosphere forever. And I still include it here, though, because it is needed in the early pathway timeframes, while the rain cage carbon sets up sufficient manufacturing and perhaps even more important carbon utilization markets that those get set up. But still, even all of these things together, my guess is the oil and gas industry will shrink by about 1/3 to 1/2 by 2040. Our Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin is a gassy basin. Canada already has one LNG export terminal under construction at Kitimat, BC, and we could use about 4 more across all 3 coasts. We have natural gas pipelines. We have LNG ships that are common in the world. We know how to do this. And according to the Canadian Gas Association, Canada is estimated to have enough natural gas resources to equal over 200 years of current annual demand. Not that we're going to burn all that, but it's there if we need it. What else might our energy future look like? Well, we will be seeing more solar and wind installations, which are the cheapest available power. I think wind turbines will become more affordable as vertical axis units improve and will occupy a smaller footprint but be more numerous on solar sites. I'm a big fan of solar panels. I have had them on my garage for 8 years now, and I think despite the current damper on solar caused by our Alberta government while trying to address some really, truly serious issues, which was a good thing. However, they could have handled it better, as they've also introduced more uncertainty, and that lack of clarity and more time-consuming, less streamlined approvals process has increased business risk, and that still needs to be fixed. I think we will be seeing more solar installations on both open land and especially within urban areas, likely as virtual power plants, which we will talk about shortly. The thing I love about tech is it just keeps improving. New tech in the solar space are these bifacial solar panels, used in open areas. They perform best when installed near highly reflective surfaces like water or snow areas. So although the front of the panel still absorbs the majority of the sunlight, depending on where you put them, some bifacial models are capable of taking reflected light and making power out the back of the panel and increasing energy production by up to 30% at an upfront cost increase of only 10%. Using the checkerboard arrangement of solar panels like these in Kenya means we can grow veggie crops that are not otherwise possible in hot and dry areas. Half of the time, these plants get direct sunlight, and half of the time they get indirect sunlight. This cuts down on the midday wilting, right? So that the plants can actually use that energy instead of recovering from the wilt. They can use that energy to grow faster and with reduced water use. I see more of these types of operations coming to Alberta, near Brooks maybe, Medicine Hat, Drumheller, like the hot, dry areas of southeast Alberta. I think this is going to be a great benefit. These panels are 3 meters off the ground, so you can drive harvesting and planting equipment underneath them. And also, I think that it's a good candidate for bifacial solar panels that we just talked about. This system is ideal for growing lettuce and spinach and kale and arugula and herbs like basil, cilantro, mint, parsley, and other things as well. I also am a big fan of the combo of sheep and solar farms because it's a powerful one whereby we use sheep to graze down the long grasses and weeds and reduce fire hazards. Here in Alberta, Capital Power partnered with Whispering Cedars Ranch on their 320-acre, 41-megawatt solar farm using bifacial solar panels we just talked about. They got 25% more power than the monofacial system. Ryan and Jenna, friends of mine, they have grazed 600 ewes on this site, and they are starting experiments with a kune pig, shown in the bottom right of this slide, to be with the sheep as well. And this agrisolar system actually builds soil. It's estimated that the sheep will build an extra 2.5 inches of healthy soil during the lifetime of this project of 50 years. It also increases local food security, although Albertans will need to learn to like eating lamb, similar to people in central Canada. Even though solar and wind are the cheapest forms of electricity production, there is an intermittency problem. This is what a solar farm looks like with batteries and electrolysis for hydrogen production and hydrogen storage. The batteries provide fast response power in smaller quantities, whereas stored hydrogen provides a somewhat delayed power response, but in large amounts of power that can be stored for seasons to years. Combining these three technologies, solar, battery, and hydrogen, on the same site is an example of what can be done to firm up intermittent solar power. Start by building more solar power than the grid in the area can use. Put that excess power into the batteries first, and then they can kick in on a second to microsecond basis to support the grid anytime. But they can't store much power. 4 to 12 hours worth, depending on the type of battery, and just for a few days or a week or two. Batteries also buy you time so you can heat up the hydrogen electrolyzers. After the batteries are full, direct the extra power and some water into the hydrogen electrolyzers in the forward mode. So that would make hydrogen, which is then stored on site. Hydrogen can store larger amounts of energy than batteries and can do so for seasons to years. So when power is needed, you run the same electrolyzer equipment backwards, which takes in hydrogen and makes power and remakes the water. This slide shows storing hydrogen in the liquid form. I would rather not do that. I'd rather use carbon-filled tanks, which can store 2 times the hydrogen at about 14 times less pressure, or store it as in the form of metal hydrides, in which case we can put 2 tons of hydrogen into a 40-foot sea can. It's important to make enough hydrogen to get through the blackouts and the longer and more extreme weather events that affect reliable power. For example, for powering through cold winter domes when there's a high demand and very low wind and solar resources. When the hydrogen runs out, make sure there are enough natural gas / biogas peaker plants to pick up the power slack if needed. As promised earlier, we're going to talk about one of my favorite future energy systems, and that is called a virtual power plant. Solartility is one of the many virtual power plants that are starting up around the world. Solartility is a Calgary-based company working on virtual power plants for all of Alberta. Their job is to aggregate and supply home-generated, solar-sourced battery power to support the grid whenever it's needed. And it works like a co-op. So their business model is to install solar panels, a home battery, and an electric car charger at your home for no upfront cost. Instead, it's on a 20-year lease, which is really long, so the payments are small. Imagine that all your neighbors did that too. Together, you become this virtual power plant. So when the grid is struggling to supply enough power, it pays at least 2.5 times more for that power than what we buy power from the grid for. So when the power is drawn from all of these home batteries charged with home solar, the co-op makes good money. That extra money is shared inside the co-op and put against everybody's power bills. You pay the regular rate for the power you use, plus that small monthly equipment lease fee. However, those charges are offset by the co-op making money and selling power to the grid at a higher price. Taken all together, that is at least a 30% savings on your power bill compared to before. We have all likely heard about heat pumps by now because, they've been in the news a lot lately. But they do not create heat. Heat pumps move heat from place to place, both to heat and to cool your home using electricity. They are a box that sits outside the building and works much like your refrigerator does. Heat pumps are 4 times more energy efficient than natural gas furnaces or boilers. They run on electricity. They can also cool your home during the summer and heat it during the winter. Cold weather heat pumps are good to about -30 Celsius. I would still keep my home natural gas for emergency backup though. This unit showed recently in the news out of Germany. Home Power Solutions says its new Picea 15 kilowatt system uses surplus power from photovoltaic solar panel installations to produce hydrogen via electrolysis right in your house. It offers 1,500 kilowatt hours of hydrogen storage capacity right on site. This is huge. It's like 100 times what a typical home battery can store. In summer, the electrolyzer uses the excess energy from your photovoltaic solar system to produce green hydrogen, which is stored on site on the black side of that box you see. In winter, as we've seen before, the electrolysis process basically runs backwards, so the hydrogen is converted into electricity again for use when needed. That's really smart. Another wordy slide to take a photo of if you wish. What else might the future look like by 2050? And this is my wish list. We have successfully removed enough CO2 from our atmosphere to get back down to like 350 ppm. Oceans have cooled down. We build much of our cities and infrastructure out of carbon now. Population of the world is stabilized. 50% of land and ocean is preserved and restored habitat for all our relations by 2050. We only live because they do. Mass or mobility as a service in urban areas, that's autonomous shared electric vehicle fleets, are running smoothly. Therefore, there's 60% less roads. Urban forests are ubiquitous in cities for shade and beauty. Agrisolar and city gardens are in place for food security. Circular economy is thriving, especially for metals, but everything else too. Landfills are a thing of the past. No more one-use plastics and great plastic recycling systems. Waste to power, waste to biochar, waste to biogas is the norm. Virtual power plants and distribution, connected mini grids. We have capitalism, which has been fine-tuned to close the rich-poor gap and expand the middle class. Social values shift towards elegance, an elegant life, which in my definition is purposeful work, plus beauty, plus simplicity, plus an excess of time. And all the kids' education includes exploring their own unique design and identifying their own life purpose. Well, why would we even bother with all this decarbonization stuff if we already have access to hydrocarbons? Climate change is afoot in the world, largely an unintended consequence of burning hydrocarbons and pooping the byproducts into the atmosphere for a couple of centuries. Why can I say that at all? Let's look at two independent lines of evidence. The Earth's changing CO2 patterns over the past 800,000 years, and then let's look at some physics. Let's start with the Earth's history. This is the NASA graph of atmospheric CO2 concentrations over the past 800,000 years. Now, we know this from Greenland and Antarctic ice cores that actually go back that far. There have been 8 interglacial glacial periods during that time that reflect what we call the natural Milankovitch cycles. Now, Milankovitch cycles describe the 3 ways that the Earth's orbit around the sun changes over the course of tens of thousands of years, which changes planetary temperatures and causes ice ages. These changes have been a major factor in controlling periods of glaciation. The troughs on this graph show low atmospheric CO2 due to ice ages, and the peaks are higher CO2 concentrations during interglacial periods. The last glaciation ended recently, about 10,000 years ago. At the far right, at the end of the graph, is a vertical line. It does not fit the pattern. This is our human-caused emissions. And the only vertical line on the graph. Notice the white horizontal dashed line marking the very, very highest CO2 peak in the last 800,000 years, and it comes in at 300 ppm. We blew past that in 1911. The vertical character of our recent line shows a markedly increased rate of change over the usual Milankovitch cycles. What is Earth's sensitivity to CO2 concentration? Well, look at the bar on the right, starting at the bottom. What would happen if there was no CO2 in our atmosphere? If that were the case, the average temperature on the planet would be about minus 18 degrees Celsius, and most of the water on Earth would be frozen most of the time. When we get below about 200 ppm, we're in for an ice age. We estimate stable weather patterns might be achieved around 350 ppm, and we're currently ringing in at 427 ppm and climbing today. I was born in 1958 at 315 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. We breached the safe limit of 350 ppm in December of 1986 when I was 28. I became a mom in 1995 at 361 ppm, and now as a grandmother at 66, we are at 427 ppm CO2 in the atmosphere. So this has been geologically instantaneous, actually. One human lifetime, an increase of 112 ppm. Rate matters. Ecosystems can't adapt nor migrate that fast. Our carbon cycle on Earth is seriously out of balance now. So now let's look at the physics. This is how the sun warming the Earth normally works. Light is shortwave radiation. That's what makes it light. Sunlight passes through our atmosphere like a window. It hits the Earth and it changes to long-wave radiation we call heat. That heat is then reflected back out to space. Now, on its way, there are certain heat-trapping gases like CO2, methane, and now nitrous oxides and sulfur hexafluoride and things. And all these gases heat up. And they share that heat, that acquired heat, with the rest of the atmosphere. How do we know this anyway? Well, in 1856, Eunice Newton Foote, an amateur climate scientist, made the remarkable discovery. She demonstrated the greenhouse gas effect in her home laboratory. Now, she placed a glass cylinder full of carbon dioxide in sunlight and found that it heated up much more and much faster than a cylinder of ordinary air. And back in those days, you know, it was almost inconceivable that a person with a womb could have a good science head at the same time. So her discovery was did not get the attention that it deserved. And 3 years later, in 1859, the Irish physicist John Tyndall built on her discovery and experimentally demonstrated the warming effect of the sun's rays on carbon dioxide and water vapor. He gets the credit. Let's look at his experiment in a little more detail. This is John Tyndall's experimental apparatus. He used that horizontal enclosed like gas-filled tube to measure the heat transfer and absorption through successive gases. So this involved the use of galvanometers and thermopiles to make the accurate heat measurements. He filled that tube with a single atmospheric gas, and he added a measured amount of heat to one end. And he used infrared radiation from a copper cube containing boiling water. And that infrared radiation is just like the heat emanating from the Earth's surface. And he found the main constituents of the atmosphere, nitrogen and oxygen, were almost entirely transparent to heat. However, Somewhat to his surprise, he observed that other components of the atmosphere, carbon dioxide and water vapor, absorbed more than 80% of the long-wave heat radiation passing through them. CO2 has a very long hang time in the atmosphere, 300 to 1,000 years. Water vapor is not directly as big a deal because it has a short hang time in the atmosphere, a few days to a couple of weeks, but as CO2 warms up the atmosphere, that atmosphere is able to carry more water vapor, and that does have an indirect but significant global warming effect. So John Tyndall did not measure methane, so let's look at that now. So these are heat absorption graphs of carbon dioxide on the top and methane on the bottom. And this is done by the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US Department of Commerce. The horizontal axis shows the range of heat wavelengths from 400 cycles per centimeter on the right to 3,600 cycles per centimeter on the left. The vertical axis is logarithmic, and it shows increased heat absorption when the curve actually deviates downwards. So you can see the ranges of wavelength absorption is different for both molecules. Because they have different numbers of atomic bonds, their vibrational modes are supposed to be different. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency concludes that methane's lifetime in the atmosphere is much shorter than carbon dioxide, but methane is more efficient at trapping heat radiation than CO2 is. So pound for pound, the comparative impact of methane is about 28 times greater than CO2 over when we measure it over a 100-year period. Globally, 50 to 65% of total methane emissions come from human activities. And this is the main reason that oil and gas industry worldwide must take decisive action to stop methane leaks and emissions. You know, this is our moment, folks. We can get this done. The first methane detecting satellite went up in 2017. There are now over a dozen methane detecting satellites in orbit. And they have an ever-improving sensitivity and granularity to what they can see. A methane leak can easily be detected from space and tracked back to its source now. Usually oil and gas operations, but can also be related to agricultural practices and especially landfills. We know who you are and we know what you did. So back to CO2. If it's the case that stable weather systems and seasons could be restored at an atmospheric level of about 350 parts per million, and we're clocking in at 427 parts per million now, even if we did not put any more CO2 into the atmosphere, how might we take it out? I have 3 ideas, and 2 are based on technologies developed here in Calgary. This is idea number 1. We use a combination of biogas and the rain cage carbon Eden technology. Here's the pathway. Follow the orange arrows from the top left. Atmospheric CO2 goes into plants, into farm animals, into poop, into biodigesters to make biomethane or biogas, which is then mixed with fossil gas in the pipelines and piped to an industrial scale combustion uses. CO2 captured by the bolt-on rain cage Eden unit permanently sequesters that CO2 into useful forms of solid black graphene molecules, as we've discussed. Now let's have an Alberta-based wild hallucination for a moment. Imagine that the entire feedlot alley from Strathmore to Taber, Alberta, made biogas from cow poop and put it into the natural gas pipeline. Let's say we get up to, wild hallucination, maybe 20% by volume. And then imagine that 20% biogas, 80% fossil gas combination is burned to make power, say, at the Shepard gas plant in South Calgary. Imagine it has a rain cage Eden unit on it. Now over 90% of that CO2 is captured, and that means that 18% of the plant throughput is atmospheric CO2 permanently sequestered into solid carbon graphene. Now expand that to every industrial natural gas user on the planet and let it become the default, the normal way of doing business. And now we would be getting somewhere in decarbonizing our atmosphere. This is idea number 2. This idea involves 3 Calgary companies, EcoGrowth Environmental, CarbonX, and its sister company, Clean02. Food waste in the world's landfills make a lot of methane gas that significantly adds to the greenhouse gas effect that we are currently wrestling with. What if we separated and handled food waste differently before it even gets to the landfill? The pathway would be atmospheric CO2 into food waste, into the EcoGrowth Environmental EGOR unit, which uses a modest amount of electricity to sterilize and also turn that food waste into biofuel. That biofuel is then combusted in EcoGrowth's biofuel boiler called the Eco40 and used for building or water heat. Now, the exhaust is 100% bio-CO2. It is then captured by the CarbonX unit and turned into pearl ash. And pearl ash is a component in soap making. And so the pearl ash is made into soap by CarbonX's sister company, Clean02. And that CO2 is now, from the atmosphere through food, is now permanently sequestered in soap, such that it never comes out, even after we use the soap. This process would prevent food waste from ever getting into landfills in the first place and end our methane production at landfill. This is idea number 3, biochar. This idea again, follow the orange arrows, involves making biochar from waste wood. So the pathway is atmospheric CO2 into forests, into waste wood, into heating the wood in the absence of oxygen to between 400 and 600 C with either a stationary or a mobile biochar unit pictured on this slide. There are many in the world. And those biochar units make biochar graphene formation out of the wood. And it can be applied to soils. Biochar is an excellent addition to any agricultural soil as it holds more water and nutrients to support the plant growth and it also neutralizes the acidity of the soils. It provides improved water and nutrient retention, improved drainage and aeration, particularly in sandy soils, and improves the habitat for the beneficial soil microbes. We still have biochar soils made by ancient peoples that are like 5,000 years old. So these are in the Amazon basin. So biochar is a semi-permanent sequestration, and it's carbon negative. So those are 3 ways to decarbonize our atmosphere. And the bottom line here is that we have to stop treating the planet like we have another one to go to. So re-engineering our world energy systems is vital, doable, and likely within the purview of all our oil and gas companies going forward as they become energy companies. And I would like to invite you to my daily blog designed to help people, especially young people, afflicted with climate anxiety, depression, and despair, to have real hope based on real things happening today to address climate change and all her sisters. This Patreon address is on the screen, and I'll get you there, as will Googling how the future can go really, really well. There are over 3,500 articles in the archives now. Ideal reference for schools. Now you have my contact information for future discussion. Thank you for your kind attention to this talk. Be well.